In the unforgiving expanse of the American West, where hope often withers under the relentless sun, a remarkable story of resilience unfolds. Sarah Winters, a dedicated schoolteacher, lost everything to a fraudulent landowner's scheme. Her beloved schoolhouse, her modest home, and every penny to her name. With nothing but a cherished torn book in her bag and determination in her heart, she embarks on a desperate 100-mile journey through dust and heat, seeking work in the next town. Miles from anywhere, her strength finally fails her. Just as consciousness slips away, a shadow falls across her face. A lone cowboy, wealthy beyond measure yet haunted by his own solitude, discovers her collapsed form. In this moment of fate, neither realizes that this chance encounter will change both their lives forever. What secrets lie behind the cowboy's quiet demeanor, and can two wounded souls find healing in each other's company? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The afternoon sun painted long shadows across the weathered floorboards of Willow Creek Schoolhouse as Sarah Winters stood at her worn oak desk, her fingers trailing over the smooth surface that 6 years of daily use had polished to a gentle sheen. Outside, the spring breeze carried the sweet scent of wild honeysuckle through the open windows, along with the distant laughter of children heading home. She hadn't told them it was their last day together, couldn't bear to see the confusion in their young eyes. The deed papers lay before her, each line of legal text a dagger to her heart. Harrison Blake's signature sprawled across the bottom like a serpent's trail, the ink still fresh from this morning's meeting. The document declared in unflinching terms that both the schoolhouse and her adjacent home now belonged to Blake Enterprises, effective immediately. Just a minor adjustment to the property lines, Blake had said earlier, his practiced smile never reaching his steel-grey eyes. Progress requires sacrifice, Miss Winters. Surely you understand that the railroad's expansion benefits everyone. His words dripped with false sympathy as he adjusted his expensive vest, a subtle reminder of the power imbalance between them. Sarah gathered her few personal belongings, a collection of beloved books, a handful of student drawings, and her mother's silver locket. Each item felt heavier than the last as she placed them in her carpet bag. The children's artwork caught her eye: Emma Thompson's watercolor of the schoolhouse, young Thomas Baker's careful sketch of their garden. 6 years of memories reduced to what she could carry. A knock at the door startled her. "Miss Winters?" Little Mary Cooper stood in the doorway, her red-gold braids catching the late afternoon light. "Pa says there's talk in town. He says you might be leaving." The girl's voice trembled slightly, her small hands clutching a wildflower bouquet. Sarah's throat tightened. "Come here, dear." She knelt to embrace her youngest student, careful not to crush the flowers. "Sometimes life takes unexpected turns, but that doesn't mean we forget what matters most. But who'll teach us about the stars?" Mary's eyes welled with tears. "You're the only one who knows all their stories." Before Sarah could answer, more faces appeared in the doorway. Her students, their parents, familiar faces from 6 years of community gatherings and school plays. Mrs. Cooper stepped forward, her kind face etched with concern. "We've all heard what Blake's done. It isn't right, Sarah. We can fight this." Sarah straightened, squaring her shoulders despite the weight in her heart. "The papers are legally binding, Margaret. Mr. Blake made quite sure of that." She managed a small smile. "Besides, change is part of life's journey. We teach the children that every day, don't we?" As the sun sank toward the horizon, the schoolhouse filled with townspeople. They brought food, words of comfort, and offers of help, none of which could change the cruel reality of Blake's scheme. Sarah accepted their kindness with grace, though each embrace felt like another goodbye she wasn't ready to make. Later, alone in the gathering dusk, Sarah discovered one final gift left on her desk, a small leather-bound copy of Little Women, its spine cracked from years of reading. Inside, her students had pressed wildflowers between the pages and written messages of love and gratitude. It was then, in the quiet of her beloved schoolhouse, that Sarah finally allowed her tears to fall. She wouldn't learn until much later that Harrison Blake had done this before, buying out small properties through carefully crafted legal deceptions, always one step ahead of the law. For now, all she knew was the ache of loss and the uncertainty of tomorrow. But as she locked the schoolhouse door for the final time, the weight of her mother's words echoed in her memory. Sometimes, dear heart, the hardest paths lead us exactly where we need to go. Sarah turned westward, toward the setting sun. Tomorrow would bring what it would, but tonight she had her memories, her dignity, and a worn copy of Little Women to keep her company through the dark hours ahead. In the fading light of her small home, Sarah spread a weathered map across her kitchen table, its creases deep from years of dreaming about places she'd never been. Her finger traced the thin line representing the road to Millbrook, the nearest town of any size, 103 miles as the crow flies. She'd checked the distance 3 times now, hoping somehow the numbers might change. The meager contents of her purse lay scattered beside the map. $2.37. Not enough for a stagecoach ticket, barely enough for supplies. Blake's timing had been impeccable, taking control just days after she'd spent her savings on new books for the school library. Books that now belonged to him, along with everything else. Sarah lit a candle as darkness crept in, its flame casting dancing shadows on the walls of what had been her home for 6 years. Every corner held a memory. The windowsill where she'd grown herbs for tea, the rocking chair where she'd graded papers late into the night, the hook by the door where her father's old pocket watch still hung, its steady ticking a reminder that time waited for no one. She picked up the watch, remembering her father's words. "The world's big, Sarah girl, but your spirit's bigger." He'd been gone 5 years now, but his wisdom still guided her. What would he say about her plan to walk to Millbrook? Perhaps he'd understand. He'd always said that desperate times called for determined hearts. Taking inventory of her possible supplies, Sarah moved methodically through her home. Her carpet bag could hold the essentials: 2 changes of clothes, her mother's Bible, the copy of Little Women from her students, a tin cup, and what little food she could carry. Her most comfortable boots, though worn, would have to suffice. For the journey, at her small desk, she began writing letters, one to Mrs. Cooper, one to Reverend Matthews, and one to the school board, though she doubted they'd stand against Blake's influence. Each letter carefully explained her decision to seek work elsewhere, her gratitude for the years spent in Willow Creek, and her hope that someone would continue teaching the children, even if in a makeshift classroom. The night deepened as Sarah worked on her hand-drawn copy of the map. She marked potential resting spots, water sources she'd heard travelers mention, and alternative routes in case the main road proved too exposed to the elements or to curious eyes. Blake had friends in neighboring towns. Better to stay away. From their notice, a soft knock interrupted her planning. "Sarah!" Margaret Cooper's voice came through the door. "I brought you some supper." Sarah opened the door to find her friend holding a basket covered with a checkered cloth. The aroma of fresh bread and stew brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "You're planning to leave tonight, aren't you?" Margaret asked, setting the basket. On the table, her gaze took in the map, the partially packed bag, the letters. "At first light," Sarah admitted. "The longer I stay, the harder it will be." Margaret's face showed understanding mixed with worry. "It's a long way to Millbrook, Sarah. Let Thomas drive you at least part way in our wagon." Sarah shook her head. "Blake's men watch the roads. I won't risk bringing trouble to your family, Margaret. I'll manage." They embraced, both knowing this might be their last meeting for a long time. "Take this, then." Margaret pressed a small package wrapped in brown paper into Sarah's hands. "Dried beef and hard tack. It'll keep better than bread." After Margaret left, Sarah added the package to her bag, her heart full of gratitude for such friendship. She spent the remaining hours of darkness making final preparations, wrapping her feet carefully with strips of cloth before putting on her boots, filling her water canteen, and writing one last letter, this one to herself, a reminder of why she had to leave, why looking back wasn't an option. As the first grey light of dawn crept over the horizon, Sarah Winters stood in her doorway one last time. The morning star still hung in the western sky, pointing the way toward Millbrook like a beacon of hope. She adjusted the carpetbag on her shoulder, touched her father's watch for courage, and took her first step toward an uncertain future. Behind her, Willow Creek slept peacefully, unaware that its schoolteacher was walking away from everything she'd known toward everything she'd yet to discover. The rising sun cast long shadows across the prairie grass as Sarah kept a steady pace along the lesser-used trail she'd chosen. Her boots, comfortable enough in the schoolhouse, already pressed against her heels with each step. The morning air held the promise of heat to come, though for now the coolness was a blessing. She'd avoided the main road, taking instead the old cattle trail that wound through the rolling hills. Twice she ducked behind scrub brush at the sound of approaching horses, her heart pounding until the riders passed. Neither group had been Blake's men, but she couldn't risk being seen and reported back to him. His influence reached far, and his pride wouldn't take kindly to her slipping away, instead of begging for charity. By mid-morning, the sun had burned away any trace of dawn's comfort. Sarah paused beneath a lone cottonwood tree, allowing herself a small sip from her canteen. The water was still cool, and she forced herself to recap it before taking more. "Ration everything," she whispered to herself, her teacher's voice emerging naturally even here, miles from any classroom. Opening her copy of Little Women, Sarah smiled at the pressed flowers her students had hidden between its pages. She'd read the book so many times she could recite whole chapters from memory, but now its familiar words offered new comfort. Jo March's determination to make her own way in the world seemed especially poignant this morning. A meadowlark's song drew her attention to the vastness around her. The prairie stretched out in all directions, an ocean of grass rippling in the warm breeze. In 6 years of teaching, she'd never felt so small, so alone. Yet there was freedom in this solitude, a chance to prove to herself what she was capable of surviving. Standing again was harder than she'd expected. Her feet protested, and the carpet bag seemed to have gained weight during her brief rest. Sarah adjusted the shawl she'd draped over her head for sun protection and consulted her hand-drawn map. If she maintained this pace, she should reach Miller's Creek by sunset, a good place to rest, with fresh water and enough brush for shelter. As she walked, Sarah distracted herself by planning lessons she might teach in Millbrook, if they'd have. Her geography would be different now. She'd tell students about how the prairie changed color as the sun moved across the sky, how distance played tricks with the eye. Science lessons could include the hardy plants that thrived in this seemingly inhospitable land, the birds that soared overhead marking invisible air currents. A sharp stone through her boot sole interrupted her thoughts. Sarah sat again. This time to inspect what was becoming a worrying weakness in her left boot. The leather was wearing thin. It might not last the 100 miles she needed it to cover. Using a spare piece of cloth from her bag, she padded the inside as best she could. "One step at a time," she murmured, her father's favorite saying when, faced with a daunting task, the sun climbed higher and Sarah's steps grew shorter. Her initial optimism about covering 20 miles the first day began to feel ambitious. The prairie, so beautiful in the morning light, now seemed to stretch endlessly before her. Each rise revealed only another rise beyond it. Each landmark took longer to reach than she'd estimated. Yet she pressed on, measuring time by the sun's arc across the sky, distance by the changing patterns of wildflowers beneath her feet. When her throat grew too dry to ignore, she allowed herself another careful sip of water. When her legs trembled with fatigue, she recited poetry in rhythm with her steps, anything to keep moving forward. Late afternoon found her watching a family of prairie dogs, their curious chirping a welcome break from the silence of her own. And thoughts They reminded her of her younger students, always alert, always ready to duck away at the first sign of danger. "Wise little teachers," she said softly, grateful for the lesson in survival they unknowingly offered. The sun was touching the horizon when Sarah finally spotted the cottonwoods that marked Miller's Creek. Her feet were blistered, her muscles ached in ways she'd never experienced, and her water was dangerously low. But she'd made it, the first leg of her journey completed through sheer determination. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now she had water ahead and enough daylight left to make a simple camp. Sarah touched her father's watch, taking comfort in its familiar weight. "One day down," she whispered to the setting sun, "just a few more to go." Sarah noticed the change in the air before she saw it, a subtle shift in the wind's direction, carrying an earthy scent that made her nose twitch. Looking up from her careful steps, she saw the western horizon had taken on an ominous copper tinge. In all her years in Willow Creek, she'd seen enough dust storms to know what was coming. She clutched her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders, scanning the landscape for shelter. The morning's walking had taken her into more exposed territory, where the rolling hills flattened into vast stretches of open prairie. The nearest cluster of trees was at least a mile away, perhaps more. Too far. The wind picked up, and with it came the first particles of dust, fine as flour and just as choking. Sarah pulled her shawl up to cover her nose and mouth, her mind racing through her options. Her father's lessons about prairie survival echoed in her memory. If you can't find shelter, make it. The land provides if you know how to look. A depression in the ground caught her eye, a shallow buffalo wallow, worn into the earth by generations of great beasts that no longer roamed these plains. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Sarah hurried toward it, her boots slipping on the loose soil as the wind grew stronger. The copper wall was moving faster now, a massive cloud of dust that seemed to devour the landscape as it approached. Sarah reached the wallow just as the first real gusts hit, nearly knocking her off her feet. She dropped into the shallow depression, pressing herself as close to the ground as possible. Using her carpet bag as an anchor, she spread her shawl over her head and upper body, tucking the edges beneath her. The fabric was thin from years of use, but its tight weave might help filter the worst of the dust. Through the worn material, she watched the world disappear into a swirling orange haze. The storm's fury was unlike anything she'd experienced before. Wind howled across the prairie like a living thing, trying to tear away her makeshift shelter. Dust found every tiny opening, working its way under the shawl, into her clothes, her eyes, her mouth. Sarah buried her face in the crook of her arm, breathing as shallowly as she could. Time lost meaning in the howling chaos. Sarah clutched her father's watch in one hand, feeling its steady ticking against her palm. A reminder that this, like all storms, would eventually pass. She thought of her students, wondering if they'd remember her lessons about weather patterns and prairie safety. Would they recognize the signs she'd failed to spot earlier this morning? The dust grew so thick it created an artificial night. In that strange darkness, Sarah's mind wandered to the stories her mother used to tell about pioneers crossing these same prairies. How many had been caught in storms like this? How many had survived through nothing but grit and determination? A sudden shift in the wind threatened to tear away her shawl. Sarah gripped it tighter, ignoring the burning in her arms. The fabric had been a gift from her mother, worn to Sunday services and school functions for years. Now it was serving a far more vital purpose, becoming perhaps the thing that stood between her and disaster. When the wind finally began to ease, Sarah remained still, counting her heartbeats as she waited for the dust to settle. Slowly, carefully, she lifted one corner of the shawl. The air was still thick with floating particles, but the worst had passed. The sun, when she could see it, had moved well across the sky. The storm had lasted nearly 2 hours. Sitting up made her dizzy. Every movement released small clouds of dust from her clothes, her hair, her skin. Her water canteen, when she checked it, was nearly empty. She'd need to find more soon. But she was alive, and her belongings, though covered in a fine layer of dirt, were intact. Sarah shook out her shawl, watching the dust fall away from its faded pattern. The fabric had held, protecting her when she needed it most. Like her, it was a bit weathered, but still serving its purpose. She wrapped it around her shoulders again, finding comfort in its familiar weight. Standing on shaky legs, Sarah consulted her map, now smudged with dusty fingerprints. The storm had cost her precious hours of daylight, but it had also taught her something valuable about herself. She was stronger than she'd known, more resilient than she'd believed. Like the prairie grass that bent but didn't break in the wind, she too would endure. With renewed determination, Sarah adjusted her carpet bag and began walking again, leaving footprints in the newly deposited dust. Each step was a small victory, another moment of choosing to continue despite everything the world had thrown in her path. Logan Sterling rose before dawn, as he had every day for the past 15 years. The massive ranch house was quiet, save for the steady tick of his father's old pocket watch on the bedside table. He picked it up, its weight familiar in his palm. The gold case worn smooth from 3 generations of Sterling men checking the time. The watch had been his father's last gift to him, pressed into his hands with trembling fingers. "The ranch is yours now, son," James Sterling had whispered. "Time won't stop for grief. The cattle still need tending." That was 12 years ago, and Logan had lived by those words ever since, building Sterling Ranch into one of the largest operations in the territory. In the kitchen, Logan lit the stove and set coffee to boil, moving through the spacious room with practiced efficiency. The house was too big for one man. His mother had always said so, but he'd never been able to bring himself to close off any rooms. Sometimes in the quiet moments like this, he could almost hear echoes of the family. Gatherings that used to fill these walls with life. The coffee's aroma drew him back to the present. Logan poured a cup and stepped out onto the wide porch, watching the first hints of dawn color the eastern sky. His foreman wouldn't arrive for another hour, and the ranch hands were still asleep in their bunkhouse. This was his favorite time of day, when it was just him and the land his father had loved so much. From the stable came a soft nickering. Shadow, his black stallion, knew the morning routine as well as his master did. Logan smiled slightly, something he did more often, with horses than people. "Coming, old friend," he called softly, not wanting to disturb the morning's peace. The stable was warm and familiar, filled with the comfortable sounds of horses shifting in their stalls. Logan moved down the center aisle, checking each animal. As he passed, his father had taught him that a rancher's first duty was to his animals. They were not just property, but partners in the work. Shadow's stall was at the far end, where the morning light would reach him first. The stallion pressed his velvet nose against Logan's chest in greeting, nearly knocking the coffee cup from his hand. "Careful there," Logan chuckled, one of the few sounds of mirth he allowed himself these days. As he saddled Shadow, Logan's thoughts drifted to the day ahead. The south fence line needed checking after yesterday's winds, and he preferred to do that himself. His foreman, Jake, had suggested hiring more hands to cover the expanding territory, but Logan valued his solitary rides. They gave him time to think, to plan, to remember. The sun was just cresting the horizon when Logan swung into the saddle. Shadow moved beneath him with the easy grace of a horse that knew its rider's every signal. They set out across the vast expanse of Sterling Ranch, hooves striking a steady rhythm against the earth. From this vantage, Logan could see most of his domain. 5,000 acres of prime grazing land, 3 natural springs, and enough grass to support twice his current herd. Success had come at a price, though. While other ranchers his age had married and started families, Logan had poured everything into the land, honoring his father's legacy the only way he knew how. The morning air carried the lingering scent of yesterday's dust storm, and Logan frowned. At the hazy horizon, he'd need to check the water sources, make sure they hadn't been fouled by the dust. His cattle depended on those springs, especially this time of year. As Shadow picked his way along the fence line, Logan absently touched the watch in his vest pocket. Time might not stop for grief, as his father had said, but sometimes he wondered if he'd stopped himself, frozen in place like one of those fancy photographs, managing the ranch but not really living. Jake's wife, Maria, had tried to draw him out of his shell, inviting him to Sunday dinners and community gatherings. But Logan had mastered the art of polite refusal, more comfortable with the straightforward challenges of ranching than the complexities of social interaction. The sun climbed higher as Logan and Shadow continued their morning patrol. Neither man nor horse suspected that this day's routine ride would lead them to someone who would challenge everything Logan thought he knew about solitude and strength. The morning sun had climbed high enough to cast sharp shadows when Shadow's ears suddenly pricked forward. Logan tensed instinctively, reading his horse's subtle signals. Something ahead had caught the stallion's attention. In these parts, unexpected. Discoveries usually meant trouble. Injured cattle, damaged fencing, or worse. Through the heat shimmer, Logan spotted an unusual shape crumpled near a cluster of prairie grass. His first thought was wind-blown debris from yesterday's dust storm, but Shadow's continued alertness suggested otherwise. Logan touched his heels to the horse's flanks, guiding them closer with careful precision. The shape resolved itself into something that made Logan's breath catch, a human figure lying motionless in the dust. He dismounted quickly, his boots hitting the ground with practiced efficiency. As he approached, details emerged. A woman's form, a carpet bag nearby, a torn shawl partially covering her face. "Ma'am?" Logan called out, maintaining a cautious distance. When no response came, he moved closer, noting the fine layer of dust coating her clothing. Her hand still clutched a battered book, knuckles white even in unconsciousness. Years of ranch life had taught Logan to assess situations quickly. She wasn't a vagrant or a drifter. The quality of her clothes, despite their dusty state, spoke of someone used to better circumstances. Kneeling beside her, Logan gently brushed the shawl away from her face. The woman's features were delicate but strong, marked by exhaustion and exposure to the elements. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her skin hot to the touch, heat, exhaustion, if he had to guess. The kind of condition that could turn fatal quickly out here. Logan's hand went to his canteen. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" He cradled her head carefully, letting a few drops of water touch her cracked lips. Her eyelids fluttered, but didn't open. The watch in his pocket ticked steadily, marking precious seconds. Decision made, Logan quickly gathered her belongings. The carpet bag was surprisingly light. The book she'd been holding appeared to be a copy of Little Women. He secured them to Shadow's saddle before returning to the unconscious woman. With gentle but firm movements, he lifted her in his arms, noting how she seemed to weigh almost nothing. "Easy now," he murmured, though whether to Shadow the woman or himself he wasn't sure. Getting her onto the horse would be tricky, but Logan had years of experience handling injured ranch hands. He mounted first, then carefully pulled her up in front of him, securing her against his chest. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he could feel the heat radiating from her through his shirt. Shadow, sensing the urgency in his master's posture, needed no urging to turn toward home. The stallion picked his way across the prairie, with smooth, ground-eating strides that wouldn't jostle their unconscious passenger. Logan kept one arm firmly around her waist, the other on the reins. Hyper-aware of each shallow breath she took, the woman stirred slightly as they rode, murmuring something about a watch and promises. Logan found himself studying her face, noting the strength in her jaw, the slight furrow between her brows, even in unconsciousness. What circumstances had brought her out here alone? The nearest town was Willow Creek, and that was nearly 60 miles back. The ranch house appeared on the horizon like a salvation, its white-painted walls bright against the prairie backdrop. Logan saw Jake emerge from the barn, obviously surprised to see his boss returning so soon. The foreman's expression changed to alarm as he recognized Logan's burden. "Jake, get Maria," Logan called out as they approached. Jake's wife was the closest thing they had to a doctor within 50 miles, and her skills had saved more than one ranch hand over the years. Everything happened quickly after that. Maria appeared as if by magic, her capable hands already reaching up to help as Logan dismounted with his charge. "Bring her to the guest room," Maria directed, falling naturally into the role of healer. Poor things burned something fierce. By the sun. As Logan carried the unconscious woman into his house, he was struck by the strange intimacy of the moment. It had been years since anyone other than Jake and Maria had entered these rooms, yet somehow this unknown woman's presence didn't feel like an intrusion. He laid her carefully on the guest bed, stepping back to let Maria take over. The woman's hand had somehow caught hold of his shirt during the ride, and she didn't let go immediately. The simple human contact, unexpected and brief as it was, left Logan feeling oddly unsettled. "I found her out by the south fence line," he explained to Maria, his voice rougher than usual. "No sign of others nearby." Maria was already busy with cool cloths and healing salves. "You found her just in time, by the look of it." She paused in her work to give Logan a meaningful glance. "God has his ways of bringing people together, doesn't he?" Logan touched his father's watch, its steady ticking a counterpoint to his troubled thoughts. "Just let me know what she needs," he said gruffly, and left the room before Maria could see too much in his expression. Sarah returned to consciousness slowly, awareness coming in gentle waves. First, the softness beneath her, a real bed, she realized with confusion. Then, the cool touch of a damp cloth on her forehead and the subtle scent of lavender in the air. Her last clear memory was of the relentless sun and growing dizziness. "Ah, you're coming back to us," a warm, feminine voice said. "Don't try to sit up just yet, querida. You've had quite an ordeal." Sarah opened her eyes carefully, finding herself in a well-appointed bedroom. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on whitewashed walls. A Mexican woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair sat beside the bed, wringing out another cool cloth. "I'm Maria," the woman said, helping Sarah take small sips of water. "You're at Sterling Ranch. My husband Jake and I help Mr. Sterling run the place." She paused, studying Sarah's face. "He found you out by the south fence line, nearly done in by the sun." Memory flooded back, the endless walking, the dust storm, the desperate rationing of water. "How long?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. 2 days you've been sleeping," Maria answered. "The fever broke last night. Mr. Sterling's been checking on you regular, though he thinks I haven't noticed." There was a hint of amusement in her voice. As if summoned by his name, a tall figure appeared in the doorway. Sarah's first impression was of quiet strength, broad shoulders, weathered features, and eyes the color of a summer storm. He carried himself with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own domain. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," Maria said, rising from her chair. "Our guest is finally awake." Logan Sterling moved into the room with measured steps, coming to stand at the foot of the bed. His hand rested on the carved wooden footboard, and Sarah noticed he wore his father's pocket watch on a chain. She'd heard its ticking in her fever. "Dreams, you gave us quite a scare, miss." His voice was deep, with a gentleness that seemed to surprise even him. "Winters," Sarah managed. "Sarah Winters. I was the schoolteacher in Willow Creek." The past tense caught in her throat. Something flickered in Logan's eyes, recognition perhaps, or concern. "That's a fair distance to travel on foot." "I didn't plan to go quite so far," Sarah admitted, then added with a touch of her old spirit. "Though I did make it 60 miles before collapsing. Not bad for a schoolteacher." The corner of Logan's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "No, ma'am, not bad at all." He glanced at Maria. "She's improving?" "Si, patron. But she needs rest, good food, and at least a week of recovery." Sarah tried to sit up straighter. I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition, Logan cut in, his tone brooking no argument. Sterling Ranch has plenty of room, and Maria's been wanting someone to fuss over besides us cowboys. This time the almost smile reached his eyes, softening their stormy grey. Maria made a sound that was half laugh, half scoff. As if you cowboys. Let me fuss. Now out with you, Mr. Sterling. I need to help Miss Winters freshen up, and then she needs breakfast. Logan nodded, touching the brim of an imaginary hat in a reflexive gesture of courtesy. At the door, he paused. Your belongings are safe, Miss Winters. The book you were holding, I took the liberty of drying it out. Dust had gotten into the pages. Thank you, Sarah said softly, touched by this evidence of consideration. It was a gift from my students. Another almost smile, and he was gone. Maria began helping Sarah sit up properly, clucking her tongue at how the younger woman trembled with weakness. Don't you worry about a thing, Maria said, arranging pillows behind Sarah's back. That man out there, he's the most honorable soul in 3 territories, stubborn as a mule and about as talkative as one, but honorable to his bones. Sarah found herself studying the doorway where Logan had stood. He seems solitary. Maria agreed, laying out a clean dress she'd apparently altered to fit Sarah. Running a ranch this size, making it prosper like he has, it's quite an achievement. But a man needs more than work to make a life whole, don't you think? Before Sarah could respond, the aroma of coffee and fresh bread wafted into the room. Her stomach rumbled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten properly in days. Maria smiled knowingly. First, we get you presentable. Then, food. And then, mi querida, you can tell me what drives a school teacher to walk 60 miles across the prairie alone. She patted Sarah's hand, but only when you're ready. Sarah sank back against the pillows, overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers. Through the window, she could see the vast expanse of Sterling Ranch, green and gold under the morning sun. Somewhere out there, Logan Sterling was going about his day, carrying her welfare as yet another responsibility on his capable shoulders. For the first time since leaving Willow Creek, Sarah felt truly safe. The kitchen table at Sterling Ranch had seen its share of serious conversations over the years, but none quite like this. Sarah sat across from Logan, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, while Maria busied herself nearby, pretending not to listen as she kneaded bread dough. 3 days of rest had brought color back to Sarah's cheeks. Though Logan noticed, she still moved carefully, as if expecting her strength to desert her. The morning light through the kitchen windows caught the auburn highlights in her hair, and he found himself having to consciously redirect his attention to the papers spread between them. Harrison Blake, Logan said, studying the deed papers. Sarah had finally felt strong enough to share. His voice carried a weight of recognition that made Sarah look up sharply. You know of him? Logan's jaw tightened. He tried similar tactics here 2 years ago. Claimed the railroad needed a right-of-way through the heart of Sterling Ranch. He reached into a nearby drawer, pulling out a yellowed newspaper clipping. But he'd tried it before in other places. I had Jake ride 3 days to verify his pattern. Sarah leaned forward to read the article, her eyes widening. The Carson Valley land scandal. This was him, under a different name. James Harrison back then. Logan confirmed. He changes names, but the scheme stays the same. False railroad claims, forged documents, always targeting smaller properties owned by people without the means to fight back legally. Maria's bread-kneading paused briefly. Like school teachers, she said softly. Sarah's hands tightened around her cup. He said it was all perfectly legal. The documents looked so official, and he had men with him. Men who carried guns beneath. They're fine coats, she swallowed hard. I should have fought harder, found a way to... No. Logan's voice was firm but gentle. Blake's operation works because he makes sure his victims feel isolated, powerless. But he made a mistake this time. Oh, Sarah looked up, meeting his steady gaze. He left a witness alive. Someone who can testify to his methods, who has proof of his dealings. Logan tapped the deed papers meaningfully. Someone with the courage to walk 60 miles rather than accept defeat. A slow flush crept up Sarah's neck. What good is courage without means? I can't afford a lawyer, and Blake has connections in every town from here to— I can, Logan interrupted, and my lawyer knows every judge worth knowing in the territory. He hesitated, then added more quietly, if you're willing to trust me with this. Sarah studied him for a long moment. Trust hadn't come easily since Blake's betrayal, but there was something in Logan Sterling's direct gaze that made deception seem impossible. Why would you help me? You barely know me. Because it's right, Logan said simply. And because Blake needs to be stopped before he destroys more lives. Maria chose that moment to slide a plate of fresh corn muffins onto the table. Eat while you plan, she instructed. Justice requires strength, and strength requires food. The domestic gesture broke the tension, drawing a small smile from Sarah. Logan watched as she selected a muffin, noting how her hands had steadied. She was stronger than she knew, this schoolteacher who'd walked so far. There's something else, Sarah said after a moment. The children of Willow Creek, they have no school now. Blake's railroad development left them with nowhere to learn. Logan nodded slowly, recognizing the pain in her voice. Education matters to you. It's not just reading and arithmetic, Sarah said, passion bringing color to her cheeks. It's showing children they can be more than their circumstances. That knowledge and determination can open doors. She paused, embarrassed by her outburst. I'm sorry, I don't mean to— Never apologize for caring about something worth fighting for, Logan said. The intensity in his voice made Sarah look up again, finding his eyes fixed on her with an expression that made her heart skip. Maria hummed softly to herself, gathering her bread dough for its final rise. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher over Sterling Ranch, its light touching the kitchen table, where two people who had been strangers days ago now bent their heads together over papers and plans, united in a cause that went beyond themselves. And, if Logan's hand rested a bit closer to Sarah's than strictly necessary, well, Maria wasn't going to mention that either. Dawn painted the ranch house in shades of gold as Sarah stood on the wide porch, breathing in the morning air. A week of proper rest, and Maria's cooking had restored her strength, though her dreams still sometimes echoed with the sound of endless walking. The ranch's morning routine unfolded before her. Ranch hands heading to their duties, the distant lowing of cattle, and Logan's tall figure moving purposefully between the barn and the corral. She watched him pause to check a young colt's leg, his movements gentle despite his size. There was a patience to him that revealed itself in quiet moments like these, when he thought no one was watching. Coffee, Miss Winters? Jake appeared at her elbow, offering a steaming cup. Logan's foreman had his wife's kind eyes, and an easy manner that made everyone feel welcome. Thank you, Jake. Sarah accepted the cup gratefully. And please, it's Sarah. After all, I'm starting to feel like part of the furniture around here. Jake chuckled. Furniture doesn't help Maria with the accounts like you did yesterday. She says you got a gift for numbers, just simple bookkeeping. Sarah demurred, though she'd enjoyed helping Maria organize the ranch's ledgers. Teaching had required similar skills, tracking supplies, managing small budgets, keeping careful records. Simple or not, the boss noticed. Jake nodded toward Logan. First time in years those books have been properly balanced. He's used to doing everything himself, you see. Sarah sipped her coffee, considering this. She'd seen Logan working late into the night, poring over accounts by lamplight. It seems a heavy burden, managing all this alone. Wasn't always alone, Jake said quietly. His father built this place from nothing, taught Logan everything he knew. When the fever took both his parents within a month of each other, Logan was just 23, had to grow up fast, become the man his father believed he could be. Movement in the corral drew their attention. Logan was demonstrating something to a young ranch hand, his hands moving with precise confidence as he adjusted the horse's tack. The morning sun caught the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples, evidence of responsibilities accepted too young. He's done his father proud, Sarah said softly. That he has. Jake gave her a sidelong glance. Though James Sterling always hoped for more than just success for his son, wanted him to find the kind of happiness he'd had with Logan's mother. Before Sarah could respond, Maria's voice rang out from the kitchen. "Jake, those fence posts won't mend themselves." Jake tipped his hat with a grin. "Yes, my love." "Don't let her work you too hard, Miss Sarah. She's got enough energy for 10 people. Left alone on the porch, Sarah found her gaze drawn back to Logan. He was approaching now, his own coffee cup in hand, and she felt the familiar flutter in her stomach that his presence increasingly inspired. "Morning," he said, coming to stand beside her at the porch railing. "Sleep well?" "Very, though I heard you up late with the ledgers." A slight smile touched his lips. "Maria mentioned you helped sort those out. I appreciate it. It was the least I could do, given your hospitality." Sarah turned to face him fully. "Logan, I've been thinking. While we wait for your lawyer to build the case against Blake, perhaps I could help more with the ranch accounts. It would give me a purpose, a way to earn my keep." Logan studied her for a moment, his grey eyes serious. "You don't need to earn your keep, Sarah. You're not a burden." "I know, but I've never been good at sitting idle." She gestured at the bustling ranch yard. "Everyone here contributes something. I'd like to do the same." The smile returned to Logan's face, warming his features. "All right. Though I warn you, 12 years of my disorganized bookkeeping might be worse than walking 60 miles. Sarah laughed, surprising both of them with the bright sound. "I doubt that. Besides, I have something now that I didn't have on that walk." "Oh?" "Good company," she said softly, and was rewarded by a faint color rising in his tanned cheeks. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher over the ranch. A young horse whinnied in the corral, and Logan's eyes tracked the sound automatically, ever alert to his responsibilities. But he made no move to leave the porch, and Sarah found herself treasuring these quiet moments of connection that seemed to be growing more frequent with each passing day. From the kitchen, a window, Maria watched them with knowing eyes, humming an old love song as she prepared breakfast for her expanding family. The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, carried by a travel-worn rider who left as soon as Jake signed for the envelope. Sarah was in the study, organizing receipts, when Logan appeared in the doorway, his expression grave. She knew immediately. Something was wrong. In the 3 weeks she'd been at Sterling Ranch, she'd learned to read the subtle shifts in his demeanor. "A letter came," he said quietly, holding up an expensive cream-colored envelope. "It's addressed to you, care of Sterling Ranch." Sarah's hands stilled over the papers. Only a handful of people knew where she was, and none of them would use such fine stationery. "Blake," she whispered, and Logan nodded grimly. He crossed the room, placing the envelope on the desk before her. Sarah stared at it, her name written in Blake's flowing hand, then looked up at Logan. Would you stay while I read it?" "Of course." His voice was steady, reassuring. He moved to stand behind her chair, a solid presence at her back. With trembling fingers, Sarah broke the seal. "My dear Miss Winters, I trust this letter finds you well after your impetuous departure from Willow Creek. Word reaches me that you've found shelter at Sterling Ranch. How fortunate for you. Perhaps you believe distance will protect you from the consequences of your actions. Let me assure you, it will not. The deed to the schoolhouse and your former residence remains legally binding. Any attempt to challenge it would be inadvisable. I would hate to see your rash behavior bring trouble to those currently harboring you. Sterling Ranch is quite impressive, I hear. It would be a shame if its owner became entangled in legal complications due to misplaced gallantry. Consider this friendly advice from one who knows the law intimately. Regards, Harrison Blake." Sarah's hands shook as she set the letter down. Behind her, Logan's breathing had grown measured in the way she'd learned meant he was controlling anger. "He's threatening the ranch," she said softly. "Because of me." Logan moved around to lean against the desk, facing her. "No, He's threatening the ranch because he's afraid of what we might do with the evidence you have. But he's right about one thing. The deed is legally binding. I signed it, even if I was deceived about its true nature." Sarah pushed back from the desk, pacing to the window. Outside, the ranch continued its daily rhythm, peaceful and productive. "I can't let him destroy all this because of my problems." "Sarah." Logan's voice stopped her pacing. She turned to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Your problems became mine the moment I found you on my land. And Blake's mistake was thinking he could intimidate either of us." He picked up the letter, studying the expensive paper. "This shows he's worried. A man confident in his position doesn't send threats." He met her eyes. "Unless you want to back down." The question held no judgment, only respect for her choice. Sarah straightened, feeling the same steel in her spine that had carried her 60 miles across the prairie. "No, but I won't risk Sterling Ranch in the process. The ranch can take care of itself." Logan's lips curved in a rare full smile. "And Blake doesn't know what he's up against. I've already heard from my lawyer. There are other victims willing to come forward now that someone's taking a stand." Sarah moved back to the desk, her skirts rustling in the quiet room. "He won't give up easily, neither will we." Logan's hand covered hers where it rested on the desk, warm and calloused. The simple contact sent awareness shooting through her entire body. Together. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning beyond their fight against Blake. Sarah looked up to find Logan watching her with an expression that made her heart race. For a moment she thought he might. A knock at the door broke the spell. Maria entered with a tea tray, took one look at their faces and the letter on the desk, and set her burden down with unusual force. "What has that snake Blake done now?" Logan's hand reluctantly left Sarah's as he turned to explain the situation. But something had shifted between them, some barrier fallen away in the face of shared purpose and mutual protection. Later, Sarah would tuck the letter away in her carpet bag, not as a reminder of fear, but as evidence of the moment she truly understood she wasn't alone anymore. Blake had meant to frighten her back into isolation. Instead, he'd only strengthened the bonds forming in her new home. The old bunkhouse had stood empty for years, its windows gathering dust until Sarah saw its potential. Now, on a bright morning a week after Blake's letter arrived, she stood before a newly installed chalkboard, facing 6 eager faces, the children, of Sterling Ranch's hands aged from 6 to 13. "Does anyone know the story of how the North Star helped guide people home?" Sarah asked, watching their eyes light up at the prospect of a tale. She discovered that starting lessons with stories made even arithmetic more palatable. "My pa says, Cowboys use it to find their way," young Tommy Martinez offered, his dark eyes serious beneath his shock of black hair. "That's right," Sarah smiled, turning to the chalkboard. "And today, we're going to learn how to calculate distances using the stars, just like the Cowboys do." A sound from the doorway drew her attention. Logan stood there, his broad shoulders filling the frame, watching the scene with undisguised appreciation. Sarah felt warmth bloom in her cheeks, but continued her lesson. "First, we'll need to understand angles," she explained, drawing a triangle on the board. "Imagine you're lost on the prairie at night. The stars become your map, but to read that map, you need to understand some basic geometry." The children bent over their slates, copying her diagram with varying degrees of success. Even 13-year-old Ana Garcia, who'd initially claimed she was too old for school, leaned forward with interest. "Miss Winters makes sums come alive." Sarah heard Tommy whisper to Logan, who had moved quietly to the back of the room. "Pa says she's magic." Logan's low chuckle warmed the air. "I'd have paid more attention in school if my teacher had explained things this way." The morning passed quickly, filled with lessons that wove practical ranch knowledge into traditional subjects. Sarah taught multiplication using cattle counts, geography through trail maps, and reading from books about Western wildlife. Each lesson was carefully designed to show the children how education could enhance the life they knew. When the children filed out for their midday meal, Logan remained, studying the chalkboard where Sarah had drawn her star charts. "You've transformed." "This place," he said quietly. "I should have thought of it years ago. The Hands children needed a school." Sarah wiped chalk dust from her hands. "They're bright children, eager to learn. Anna has a gift for mathematics that could take her far. Her father mentioned she's talking about becoming a teacher herself now." Logan moved closer, helping Sarah straighten the room's simple benches. "You've given them more than lessons, Sarah. You've given them possibilities." Their hands met on the last bench, and neither pulled away. Sarah looked up to find Logan's grey eyes intense with an emotion that made her heart flutter. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about making this arrangement permanent. The ranch could use a proper school, with a proper salary for its teacher." He paused, watching her face carefully. "If you'd be interested in staying on," Sarah's breath caught. "What about Blake? Blake's days of intimidation are numbered. My lawyer has found 3 more victims willing to testify, and the territorial judge is taking notice." Logan's hand tightened briefly over hers. "But that's not why I'm asking. These children need you. The ranch needs you." The unspoken words hung between them. "I need you. I'd need proper supplies," Sarah said, her practical nature asserting itself, even as her heart soared. "Books, maps, a globe perhaps, whatever you require." Logan's smile transformed his face, erasing years of solitude. "I trust your judgment, school teacher." The old nickname had become something of an endearment between them, and Sarah felt herself smiling in response. "Then yes, Mr. Sterling, I accept the position." "Good." He straightened, reluctantly releasing her hand. "Though I should warn you, there might be one more student joining your class occasionally." Sarah raised an eyebrow questioningly. "I find myself wanting to learn about the stars," Logan admitted, a hint of color touching his tanned cheeks. "Seems I've been missing quite a few lessons in life." He left her standing in the schoolroom, her heart full of possibilities she'd never dared imagine when she'd started her desperate walk across the prairie. Through the window, she watched him stride across the ranch yard, stopping to speak with Jake, every movement speaking of a man increasingly at peace with his world. The chalkboard behind her still showed the evening star's path across the sky, and Sarah touched the diagram gently, understanding now that some stars did more than guide you home. They helped you find where you belonged all along. The autumn morning dawned with an uneasy stillness that made the horses restless in their stalls. Sarah felt it too as she prepared the schoolroom, an electric tension in the air like the moments before a storm breaks. When she heard the sound of multiple horses approaching, she knew instinctively that Blake had finally come. Through the schoolroom window, she watched 3 expensive carriages roll into the ranch yard, followed by a half-dozen mounted men. Harrison Blake stepped down. From the lead carriage, immaculate in a black suit that seemed to absorb the morning light. His silver-headed cane caught the sun as he surveyed the ranch with the proprietary air of a man already counting his profits. Logan emerged from the main house, every inch the rancher in his work clothes and boots, a deliberate contrast to Blake's city refinement. Sarah's heart clenched at the sight of him walking alone to meet such a force, but then she noticed Jake and several ranch hands casually taking up positions around the yard. Not alone then, never alone. "Mr. Sterling," Blake's voice carried clearly across the yard. "I see you've been harboring my runaway school teacher. Miss Winters is employed here now." Logan's reply was measured, but firm. "And we both know she didn't run away from anything legal." Blake's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I have documents that say otherwise." He gestured, and a man in a lawyer's suit stepped forward with a leather portfolio, including new papers concerning Sterling Ranch's water rights. Fascinating thing about old property laws, they can be full of surprises. Sarah moved to the schoolroom door, drawn by the confrontation, despite her instinct to stay hidden. She saw Logan's shoulders tighten, though his voice remained steady. My father secured those rights 30 years ago. Ah, but did he secure them properly? Blake examined his manicured nails. My research suggests some irregularities. Nothing that can't be resolved, of course. For a price. Logan's hand moved to his father's pocket watch, a gesture Sarah had come to recognize as his way of finding strength in his heritage. You've done your research, Blake. Then you know Sterling Ranch holds grazing contracts with half the cattle operations in the territory. If our water rights are challenged, it affects more than just me. Precisely. Blake's false bonhomie echoed across the yard. Such a shame if regional cattle production were disrupted, unless, he paused meaningfully, you could convince Miss Winters to withdraw certain allegations she's been making, return to Willow Creek perhaps, and sign a few additional papers. Sarah's feet carried her forward before she could think better of it. So that's your game, she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. Threaten the entire region's livelihood to cover up your frauds. Blake's facade cracked slightly at her appearance. Miss Winters, still making trouble, I see. Still exposing truth, she corrected, coming to stand beside Logan. His hand brushed hers briefly, a gesture of support that didn't go unnoticed by Blake's sharp eyes. How touching, Blake sneered. The lonely rancher and the penniless schoolteacher. Tell me, Sterling, do you know what happened to the last man who tried to interfere with my business? The courts can be very expensive and accidents do happen. A new voice cut through the tension. Are you threatening violence before witnesses, Mr. Blake? Or should I say, Mr. Harrison? Or perhaps you prefer James Blackwood, as you were known. In Carson Valley, Judge Martinez, the territorial circuit judge, stepped down from the last carriage. His weathered face showed no emotion, but his eyes were hard as he surveyed the scene. Blake's composure slipped for the first time. Judge Martinez, I wasn't aware you were in the area. Clearly. The judge moved to stand before Blake. I've spent the past month reviewing some very interesting documents. Sworn statements from Carson Valley, land office records from 3 territories, and most recently, evidence of witness intimidation and fraud right here in Willow Creek. Sarah felt Logan's hand find hers properly this time, their fingers intertwining as they watched Blake's carefully constructed world begin to crumble. My lawyer will... Blake began, but the judge cut him off. Your lawyer? Judge Martinez nodded. Toward the man with the portfolio, who was now backing away. He's welcome to present his arguments at your trial, though given that he's implicated in half these fraudulent documents, he might want to secure his own representation first. At some unseen signal, 4 U.S. Marshals emerged from the judge's carriage. Blake's face went from red to white as he realized the depth of the trap he'd walked into. You can't, he sputtered, raising his silver-headed cane like a weapon. Logan moved then, faster than Sarah would have believed possible. One moment he was beside her, the next he had Blake's. Cane twisted from his grasp. The smaller man bent backward over the carriage step. That's enough, Logan said quietly, dangerously. You've brought your last threat to my ranch and my family. As the marshals took Blake and his conspirators into custody, Sarah felt the tension finally break like a summer storm passing. Logan returned to her side, his grey eyes bright with emotion. Family, she whispered, echoing his words. His smile was answer enough. The afternoon sun slanted through Judge Martinez's impromptu office in Logan's study, where leather-bound law books now shared space with ranch ledgers. Sarah sat straight-backed in her chair, watching as the judge sorted through the growing pile of evidence against Harrison Blake. The Willow Creek deed will be nullified, the judge announced, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he examined the documents. Along with all other fraudulent contracts Blake created, your property should be restored within the month, Miss Winters. Sarah felt Logan's presence behind her chair, solid and reassuring. And the schoolhouse, she asked, thinking of her former students, returned to the town's ownership. The judge smiled kindly. Though I understand Willow Creek is currently without a teacher. The weight of possibility settled over the room. Sarah could return, rebuild what Blake had destroyed. It was what she dreamed of during those long days, walking across the prairie. Yet now, the thought of leaving Sterling Ranch created an ache in her chest she couldn't ignore. "There are other teachers who could serve Willow Creek," Logan said, quietly, his voice carefully neutral, despite the tension Sarah could feel radiating from him. "Good ones looking for positions." Judge Martinez glanced between them, wisdom gleaming in his dark eyes. "Indeed, though finding someone for Sterling Ranch's new school might prove more challenging. Remote locations rarely attract experienced educators." Sarah's hands twisted in her lap. "The children here deserve consistency," she said softly. "They've already shown such progress, and their parents have noticed," the judge added. "My brother Ramon, young Anna's father, tells me his daughter now dreams of college. You've awakened possibilities in these children, Miss Winters." Logan moved to the window, his back to the room. "The choice must be yours, Sarah," he said, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "You've had enough of other people making decisions about your life." The judge gathered his papers unhurriedly. "No need to decide this minute. The legal proceedings against Blake will take time, and both schools can maintain their current arrangements until then." He stood, tucking the documents into his leather satchel. "Though, if I might offer an observation," Sarah looked up at him questioningly. "Sometimes what we think we're looking for turns out to be just the path leading us to what we truly need." His eyes crinkled with gentle understanding. "I'll see myself out. Good day, Miss Winters, Mr. Sterling." The study fell quiet after his departure. Sarah rose and moved to stand beside Logan at the window. Below, ranch hands were returning to their afternoon duties, the excitement of Blake's arrest giving way to the eternal rhythm of ranch life. "I never thought I'd have choices again," Sarah admitted. "After Blake took everything, I was just running toward the first hope of work I could find." Logan turned to face her, his expression vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "And now I find myself with two homes, the one I lost and thought I wanted back." She gestured toward the schoolroom where her students would return tomorrow, where young Anna dreamed of college, where Tommy's face lit up when he finally understood a difficult sum. "And the one I found without looking." "Sarah." Logan's voice was barely a whisper. "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do." She placed her hand over his where it rested on the window frame. "Because Willow Creek isn't just my past anymore. It's a symbol of letting others decide my path. But here," she smiled, feeling tears prick at her eyes, "here I chose. Every day I choose to stay, to teach, to build something new." Logan's free hand came up to brush a tear from her cheek. "The ranch would be poorer without you," he said gruffly. "These past months, watching you with the children, seeing you stand up to Blake, you've brought life back to more than just the schoolroom." Sarah leaned into his touch, understanding all he wasn't saying. "Then it's settled. I'll write to the Willow Creek School Board, recommend a teacher I know from my training. Days. Someone who'll love the town as much as I did." "Did?" Logan's eyes searched hers. "Did," she confirmed softly, "because my heart's found a new home, one with endless skies, children who need me, and a rancher who still has much to learn about the stars." Logan's smile transformed his face, years of solitude falling away as he drew her closer. Outside, the afternoon sun painted the ranch in shades of gold, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang of new beginnings. Evening painted the prairie in shades of purple and gold as Logan led Shadow from the stable, another horse already saddled beside him. Sarah stood on the porch, watching his approach with curiosity. They'd settled into comfortable routines over the past weeks since Blake's arrest, but this was different. Logan had been quietly preoccupied all day, carrying some private anticipation in his bearing. "Care for a ride?" he asked, offering her the reins of a gentle mare she'd grown fond of. "There's something I'd like to show you." Sarah gathered her skirts and mounted with practiced ease, months of ranch life having taught her new skills. Logan's eyes held approval and something warmer as he swung onto Shadow. Without further explanation, he guided them away from the ranch house, taking a trail that wound up into the rolling hills. The evening air carried the sweet scent of prairie, grass, and late summer wildflowers. They rode in comfortable silence, though Sarah noticed Logan checking his father's pocket watch more than once. Finally, he reined Shadow to a stop atop a high ridge overlooking the ranch. "This was my father's favorite spot," Logan said softly, dismounting and moving to help Sarah down. "He proposed to my mother here." Sarah's heart skipped at his words, but Logan was already spreading a blanket on the grass. "Watch," he said, settling beside her and pointing to the western horizon. The sun was setting in spectacular fashion, painting the sky in impossible colors. But Logan's eyes were on the eastern horizon, where the first stars were beginning to appear. Sarah gasped as she realized what he was showing her. "Venus," she whispered, recognizing the bright evening star. "And there," she pointed to another light emerging in the darkening sky. "That's Jupiter. We were just teaching the children about them yesterday." Logan smiled, drawing something from his pocket, a small leather pouch rather than his watch. "I never paid much attention to the stars before you came. Never saw much point in knowing their stories." He opened the pouch carefully. "But you've taught me to look up more often, to see beauty in things I took for granted." Sarah's breath caught as he tipped the pouch's contents into his palm. A ring gleamed in the last rays of sunlight. A simple gold band set with a single pearl that caught the starlight like a captured. "A moon. It was my mother's," Logan said quietly. "She told me once that my father chose a pearl instead of a diamond because it reminded him of the moon on water. Said love should be like that, a light that shows you the way home." He turned to face her fully, his usual reserve softened by emotion. "I've been watching you these past months, Sarah. Seeing how you light up the lives around you, the children, Maria and Jake, the whole ranch. My life." He took a deep breath. "I've been alone a long time, thinking that was just my lot. But you walked into my world and showed me everything I was missing." Sarah's vision blurred with tears as Logan took her hand. "When I found you that day, exhausted but still fighting, I admired your courage. When you stood beside me against Blake, I treasured your strength. But it was watching you teach, seeing your gentle wisdom change lives day by day, that made me realize I'd lost my heart to you." A meadowlark called in the distance, its evening song a sweet counterpoint to the moment. Sarah squeezed Logan's hand, finding her voice. "I was running away when I started that walk," she admitted. "But somehow I was running toward you instead. Of just from Blake, toward this place, these people, this life we've been building. Then build it with me properly." Logan's voice was rough with emotion. "Marry me, Sarah. Be my wife, my partner, my heart's true home." Sarah looked at the ring gleaming in the starlight, then at the ranch spread out below them, their home, their future. Finally, she met Logan's eyes, seeing in them all the love and hope she felt in her own heart. "Yes," she whispered, then laughed with pure joy. "Yes." As Logan slipped the ring onto her finger, Venus blazed brighter in the darkening sky. Sarah leaned into his embrace, understanding at last that some journeys weren't about the destination at all, but about finding the person you were meant to walk beside all along. The morning sun streamed through the study windows as Sarah and Logan bent over architectural drawings spread across his father's old desk. The pearl in Sarah's ring caught the light as she traced the proposed layout for Sterling Ranch's new schoolhouse, a proper building to replace the converted bunkhouse with large windows, space for 20 students, and even a small library. "The foundation can be started next week," Logan said, his shoulder warm against hers as they studied the plans. "Jake knows a crew in Cedar Springs who can help with the building. They owe him a favor." "And the books?" Sarah asked, touching the carefully itemized list she'd prepared. Years of teaching had taught her exactly what a growing school would need. Logan smiled, pulling out a telegram from his vest pocket. "Already ordered, along with the globe you wanted, and enough slates for 3 years' worth of new students." His expression softened. My mother always said education was the best investment a person could make. Sarah turned to face him, touched by his thoughtfulness. She was a wise woman. I wish I could have known her. She would have loved you. Logan's hand covered hers where it rested on the plans. Actually, I found something of hers yesterday. And that, well, Maria's been helping me go through the attic. He moved to his father's roll-top desk, withdrawing a carefully wrapped package. Sarah opened it gently to find a leather-bound book of lesson plans, the pages filled with elegant handwriting. Your mother was a teacher? Logan nodded. Before she married father, she taught in a one-room schoolhouse much like yours in Willow Creek. He touched the book's worn cover. She always said she never really stopped teaching, just found different lessons to share. Sarah leafed through the pages with reverent care, finding notes on everything from arithmetic to natural history, all tied to practical ranch life. Logan, these are perfect for what we're trying to build here, a school that honors both learning and the life these children know. A knock at the study door interrupted them. Maria entered, her face bright with excitement. The dress patterns have arrived from Denver, she announced, and Ana Garcia has a surprise for you both. They followed Maria to the schoolroom, where 13-year-old Anna stood proudly beside a new addition to the wall, a hand-drawn map of Sterling Ranch, carefully, labeled with distances, landmarks, and mathematical calculations. I used the geometry you taught us, Miss Winters, Anna explained, and the surveying techniques Mr. Sterling showed my father. She pointed to careful notations in the corner. See? I calculated the total acreage and compared it to the official ranch records. They match exactly. Sarah felt Logan's quiet pride radiating beside her. He'd spent several evenings teaching Ramon Garcia modern surveying methods, part of their shared vision of helping the ranch hands and their children build better futures. This is excellent work, Anna, Logan said gravely. Would you be interested in helping Jake update all our boundary maps? We could use this kind of precision. The girl's face lit up. Really? Papa said I shouldn't bother you with my numbers, that running a ranch is men's work. Your papa hasn't met enough ranchers then, Logan replied. The best ones know that strength comes in many forms. His hand found Sarah's, their fingers intertwining naturally. Just look at your teacher here. She walked 60 miles to prove. At that point, Sarah squeezed his hand, remembering their conversation from the night before. They'd talked late into the evening about their dreams for the ranch. Not just the school, but classes for the adults too. Reading and writing for those who never had the chance to learn. Mathematics for the hands who wanted to better understand the business side of ranching. Even special sessions where the older ranch hands could share their generations of practical knowledge. Speaking of walking, Maria interjected with a knowing smile, the ladies at church are asking about the wedding plans. They're quite excited about helping with the preparations. Sarah felt a blush warm her cheeks. The community's enthusiasm for their engagement had been overwhelming in the best way. Even her former students from Willow Creek had sent congratulations, along with pressed flowers for her bouquet. We'll need a larger schoolroom soon, Anna observed thoughtfully, adding a note to her map. Especially if you have babies. Logan's sudden cough made Sarah laugh, even as her own cheeks grew warmer. One project at a time, dear, she told Anna, though your mathematical planning is admirable. Later, watching Anna proudly show her map to Jake and the other hands, Sarah leaned against Logan's shoulder. Your mother was right, you know. The best investments aren't just in buildings or books. Logan's arm slipped around her waist. They're in people, in possibilities. He pressed a kiss to her temple, in love. Outside the foundation stones for their new schoolhouse waited to be laid, solid as their shared dreams for the future. The afternoon sun was beginning to soften when Logan appeared at the schoolroom door, his expression holding a hint of mystery that Sarah had come to recognize. He'd been disappearing on mysterious errands lately, conferring quietly with Jake. And Maria, when he thought she wasn't looking. Ride with me, he asked, echoing the words from his proposal 2 weeks ago. Sarah smiled, recognizing the particular gleam in his grey eyes that meant he had something planned. They rode together along. A different trail this time, heading east through rolling grassland dotted with late summer wildflowers. Sarah noticed they were following markers, small white stakes placed at regular intervals that hadn't been there during her last ride this way. "Logan's Sterling," she said, drawing her mare alongside Shadow. "What have you been plotting?" He gave her that rare, full smile that never failed to make her heart skip. "Patience, schoolteacher. Some lessons are better shown than told." They crested a gentle rise, and Sarah drew in a sharp breath. Below them lay a picturesque valley she remembered, admiring on previous rides. But now something new had been added. The framework of a building stood near a cluster of old oak trees, its wooden bones reaching toward the sky. "Is that—" Sarah let the question trail off as Logan dismounted and came to help her down. "Come. See?" he said softly, taking her hand. As they walked toward the structure, details emerged. The foundation was solid limestone, the framework crafted from sturdy ranch timber. Large spaces had been left for windows, and a wide porch wrapped around two sides. It wasn't a large house, but its proportions were perfect for the setting. "You thought," Logan said carefully, "that you might like a place of our own. Somewhere between the ranch house and the school, where we could start our life together." He squeezed her hand. "The main house will always be there for ranch business, but this would be just ours." Sarah walked slowly through the framework, touching the solid beams. She could see it already, morning sun through eastern windows, comfortable chairs on the porch for summer evenings, space for a garden like the one she'd had in Willow Creek. "Maria helped with the plans," Logan continued. "Said every new bride should have a say in her kitchen's design, and there's room for a library." He paused, suddenly looking uncertain. "If you like it, that is. If not, we can change anything." Sarah stopped his words with a kiss, rising on tiptoes to reach him. When she pulled back, his eyes were warm with love and relief. "It's perfect," she whispered. "But how did you manage this without me noticing?" Logan chuckled. "Jake's been running interference, keeping you busy with school plans while we worked. And those mysterious meetings with the lumber mill, not entirely about the schoolhouse." He led her to where the porch would be, pointing out features as the sun began to set. "The bedroom will face east, so you can see the sunrise. There's space for a study where you can prepare lessons. And here—" he guided her to a particular spot. "This is where I thought we could put your mother's rocking chair, the one Maria's been restoring. For quiet evenings, or—" he colored slightly, "or for when we have little ones to rock to sleep." Sarah leaned against him, overwhelmed by the thought he'd put into every detail. "You've planned everything." "Not everything." Logan turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I have one more proposal for you, Sarah Winters. The ranch is doing well, better than ever with your help on the books. I'd like to set up a fund, using part of our profits each year. A scholarship for students like Anna who dream of college." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as he continued. "You've shown me that Sterling Ranch can be more than just a cattle operation. It can be a place where dreams grow alongside the herds, where children learn their letters and their sums, but also learn that the sky's not the limit." He touched her chin gently. "What do you say? Partners in this too?" "Yes," Sarah breathed, just as she had on the hilltop 2 weeks ago. 1,000 times yes." The setting sun painted their future home in shades of gold, while overhead, the first stars began to appear. Logan drew Sarah close, both of them watching the play of light and shadow through the house's wooden frames. "In a month," he said softly, "this will be finished. A week after that we'll be married, and then we begin," Sarah finished for him, her head resting against his shoulder. "Though really, we began the moment you found me on your land." "No," Logan corrected gently. "We began the moment you decided to walk 60 miles rather than give up. I just had the good fortune to be at the end of your path." They stayed until twilight, planning and dreaming, while around them their Home-to-be stood sturdy and full of promise in the gathering dark. Golden morning light streamed through the tall windows of Sterling Ranch's new schoolhouse as Sarah adjusted the class register on her desk. The fresh pine boards still carried the scent of sawdust, and the brass bell above the door gleamed like a promise. Beside the register lay another book, her mother-in-law's lesson plans, now supplemented with Sarah's own notes and ideas. The sound of horses approaching drew her to the window. Logan was leading a wagon filled with families, not just the ranch hands' children, but others from neighboring homesteads who'd heard about the school. Word had spread since the wedding 2 months ago, carrying tales of both romance and opportunity across the territory. Sarah touched the pearl ring on her finger, remembering their simple ceremony under the prairie sky. Judge Martinez had officiated, and her former students from Willow Creek had traveled all that way to sing hymns as she walked toward Logan. Even Blake's arrest and conviction hadn't overshadowed the joy of that day. "Ready for the first day?" Logan's voice came from the doorway. He'd taken to walking her to the schoolhouse each morning, claiming it was on his way to the north pasture, though they both knew it wasn't. Almost. Sarah smiled as he crossed the room to kiss her good morning. "Did you see how many new families came?" Logan's arms slipped around her waist. "Jake says we'll need to build teacher housing soon, for when Anna comes back from college to help you." The thought warmed Sarah's heart. Anna had been the first recipient of their scholarship fund, her acceptance letter to a teaching college back east arriving just last week. "She'll need somewhere to stay between terms," Sarah agreed, "though not for a few years yet." "Years we'll use well." Logan's hand rested briefly on her stomach, where the first subtle signs of their own future had begun to show. They hadn't announced it yet, but Maria's knowing look suggested they weren't fooling anyone. The school bell rang out across the prairie, its clear tone calling children to learning. Sarah straightened her skirts and moved toward the door, but Logan caught her hand. "Wait," he said softly, "I have something for you." From his vest pocket, he withdrew a small package wrapped in tissue paper. Sarah unwrapped it carefully to find a new class register, bound in leather with gold lettering. Sterling Ranch School, Esther, 1875. Below the title was an inscription, "For the teacher who walked 60 miles to find her true home." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes as she traced the letters. "It's perfect." "Open it," Logan urged gently. Inside, on the first page, she found a pressed wildflower, one she recognized from the bouquet Mary Cooper had given her on her last day in Willow Creek. Beneath it was a note in Logan's strong hand. "Some journeys end exactly where they were always meant to begin." The sound of children's voices grew closer. Sarah quickly dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief, then reached up to straighten Logan's collar out of habit. "Will you stay for the opening?" "Wouldn't miss it." His eyes crinkled with the smile that was no longer rare. "Besides, I hear, the teacher's quite something. Makes even old cowboys want to learn about the stars." They stepped onto the porch together just as the first students arrived. Anna's younger siblings raced up the steps, followed by Tommy Martinez, proudly leading, his little sister by the hand. New faces mixed with familiar ones, all bright with anticipation. Sarah felt Logan's solid presence beside her as she rang the bell one final time. This was what she'd been walking toward all along, she realized. Not just a place to teach, but a place to build something lasting. A home where learning and love grew together, where children could reach for stars both literal and metaphorical. "Good morning, students," she called out, her voice carrying across the schoolyard. "Welcome to your new beginning." As the children filed inside, Logan kissed her cheek and whispered, "Welcome home, Mrs. Sterling." Sarah watched him stride toward the barn, then turned to enter her classroom. The morning sun painted everything in shades of promise, while outside, the prairie stretched endless and beautiful beneath the vast Nebraska sky. On her desk, the new register waited to be filled with names and dreams and possibilities. She had walked 60 miles to find this future. Now, it was time to help others, begin journeys of their own.